Welcome to this series on coping with COVID-19. And this series will be especially designed for the benefit of those parents who feel like we're sort of in a lockdown mode with our children, and we have all kinds of different aspects and variables we're working with now that are kind of new and it's disorienting almost. My name is Gerry Vassar. I'm President, CEO of Lakeside.
And I'm Diane Wagenhals, and I am the Program Director for Lakeside Global Institute.
As you can see, we're sitting here in our administrative building at Lakeside, and it is completely empty. Because we run schools and we have lots of programs for students in our region, many parents are at home, many students are at home, and we're trying to figure out, well, how do we cope with all of the new aspects of what's going on in our relationship and their behavior and our behavior as parents. And I think that part of this series is to help parents, to give us perspective, to give us information, and to give us tools as parents. I know I have 2 children, and when my children were young and growing up, our moments at home had some good and bad moments. And I think with the COVID-19 restrictions that are placed on all of us, we're feeling a lot more intensity about what we're doing with our children. So we thought this would be a great time to give some information to parents that would be helpful. Diane is someone that I have known for a number of decades, and she has been very active in working with not only parents, but parenting educators in a broad array of situations. And Diane has a great deal of expertise as an author, as a writer, as a trainer, and as a trainer of trainers in parenting education. So Diane, welcome today, and thank you so much for being here with me. This is going to be an exciting series, and we hope it's going to be just helpful to the parents that are out there who are kind of wondering what tools and what do I need to do differently in the midst of this pandemic. So Diane, as we talk to parents who are attempting to parent their children almost 24/7 now, and realize that in my own parenting style, I am doing things that sometimes I like and sometimes I don't like. Sometimes it feels like it works, sometimes it feels like it doesn't work. Can you give us some wisdom and some insight into how we parent, and some maybe we can work on a few ideas to give some tools for that?
Sure. One of the things that I learned in my journey about trying to better understand parenting is this idea that we each have a style. And Barbara Coloroso, in a book that she wrote many years ago called Kids Are Worth It, talked about these styles and gave some images that can be really helpful, I think, for parents to consider which one am I more like? And we're all a little bit, probably as parents, we can all be one of these at any given moment. But there's 4 styles, and one of them is the healthy, and the other 3 tend to do some emotional damage to kids. They certainly make their lives more difficult. I guess before I get into that, I just want to say that part of why we parent the way we parent is the way we were parented. That we learned how to parent primarily from being a child and being parented. And of course, our parents parented because of the ways that they were parented. So in going over these, it's really important that people don't feel guilty or ashamed that they may not have the best parenting style if they haven't paused to think about how is it that I can parent in a way that's going to be healthiest for my child.
And my parents told me they were on it. They were perfect,
Oh,
right?
there
They
you
had
go.
it, right?
And look, they raised you.
Of course.
That's,
oh my.
and it can go from feeling inadequate as a parent and uncertain and insecure. I know when I first had a baby and I thought, I don't know a thing about what I'm supposed to do here. And I knew I didn't want to repeat or replicate things that I knew were in my family that weren't healthy. Mm-hmm. So figuring all of this out and learning about it, that's part of why I got into all of this, was I didn't want to pass on to my kids some of the things that I had inherited from my parents were well-meaning. I'm not putting them down, but I am acknowledging that for many of us, we've come from homes where maybe the parenting wasn't exactly stellar. So in learning about these styles, It's actually, I know, I'm always reading books, and I like to know what the research is behind it. So Barbara Coloroso borrowed from Diane Baumrein, who in the 80s came up with these styles and did research on them. So it is legitimately researched. And what Barbara Coloroso said was, if you can imagine these 4 different images, actually it's 3 images, but one is like a double image. One is of a brick wall. When you think of a brick wall, you can think about how rigid that is. It's hard to penetrate. It's not very warm. And the other negative, that's one of the parenting styles that you really want to try to avoid. The other image try to avoid this one is that of a jellyfish. So what do you think of when you think of a jellyfish?
I think of something very pliable and something that you can't even grasp.
Right.
And is
It's kind of slimy.
not structured, right?
Yeah. And jellyfish parenting has two ways of being a jellyfish parent. One way is to be so compliant, just go along with anything to keep kids happy. Cave in at all, if they're unhappy, and it's like spoiling them. If they want cookies for breakfast and they whine enough, a jellyfish parent is going to go, oh, okay, you're not happy. The other kind of jellyfish parenting is the parent who is neglectful, who just doesn't want anything to do with parenting and pretty much ignores kids. And then the one that's the healthiest of these is the backbone parent. And backbone, if you can think of a backbone, what do you think of when you think of a backbone?
Something stable and strong that stands behind what you say with confidence and strong.
At the same time, it's flexible. Mm-hmm. It's appropriately flexible, and it holds the body together. So if we look at these styles of parenting, what Barbara Coloroso said is the goal is to learn how to be a backbone parent, how to have enough nurture and enough structure, which is another author I love is Jean Leslie Clark, and she talks about the nurture structure factors that we need to have as parents. So can you nurture well? Do you know what that means? Now back to if you weren't nurtured well growing up, then it can be hard to figure out how am I going to be a nurturing parent. And then when you think about today with what's been going on and how stressed parents can be, sometimes it's really hard to get into a place where you're realizing how much you need to nurture your children. So, but that's one part of being a healthy parent is knowing when and how to nurture. And the other is the structure that you need in the family. How do you effectively discipline?
So one of the things I think is interesting as we think about the different styles is I know in my parenting, if I was frustrated and I found myself dealing with constancy of the same behavior that wasn't changing, I might get to be very rigid and say, I'm going to be brick wall because I need control of the situation. I might choose to be jellyfish, just to give up and say, I'm just going to walk away.
Right.
And hopefully most of the time I would have some sense of I want to be involved and do the right thing. What was the controlling part of that, I think, was something to do with me.
Yes.
And how I was being able to find ways to cope with what I was dealing with, which I'm sure most of our parents are feeling. So what are some thoughts about strategy for that for parents that you might think about based on what we know about how we respond to stress and situations that are frustrating?
I think first you take your own pulse. I think it's about knowing where you are in your own. Of course, sometimes you have to do something immediately, but if you have a couple of moments to regroup and pause and say, am I about to go into being brick wall and rigid and commanding when that's not really what is needed right now? Or I'm about to just cave, or I'm about to just walk away. Those are the jellyfish traits. So kind of taking a moment and saying, I want to fit into that backbone style and what that means. So it's almost regulating yourself to the place where you can do that.
So regulating so you could be a little bit more intentional.
Yes.
Okay.
And so knowing some of the traits of being a backbone parent. So what are some of the ways that you do that? Some of the ways that you want to say to kids? I'm thinking about, one of the things I like to think about quite often are the messages we want to say to kids. And we want kids to know they're safe. We want kids to know that we're in charge and we care and want to hear what's going on for them, but we're in charge. So it's that blending so that kids don't feel like the world's falling apart all around them and that their parents are falling apart. So it's being able to be consistent and have structure and predictability in your parenting that is this backbone parenting style.
So we really need parents to be considering, from what I'm hearing you say, how well they are regulated.
Yes.
And we know from other research that we have in our Lakeside training that if you don't regulate, you probably won't relate well. Right. And if you don't relate well, right, you certainly aren't going to be able to be reasonable and logical. Right. So I think this regulation strategy is very important as a parent anticipates what we're doing every day, and maybe beginning each day, you should think about, how do I regulate myself? Yeah, right. And when stress comes, how do I regulate myself?
Yes, your own abilities to do that, that's where being able to do breathing and mindfulness, and I guess another big piece of this is not being too hard on yourself, not having expectations that you're going to be the perfect parent in all of this, that it's okay to be an okay enough parent, that you don't want to do damage, and it's sort of, how do I maintain enough safety and structure in the family that my kids, I'm going to go back to this, you want the kids to feel safe, not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. And that means that their parents are well in charge, but also care so much about them that they're able to be attuned and want to help meet each child's unique needs.
A great point to close this session. Thank you so much, Diane, for giving us that perspective and a way for parents to think about how they're approaching, to be a little bit more intentional. I know for me, when I have sort of a grid to help me think about what I'm doing and the impact of it, it's a little bit easier for me to go, okay, let me stop, be more intentional. And that whole idea of regulating our own brains, our own perspective is really, really helpful. We hope you found this helpful, and stay tuned for our next session where we'll be doing a little bit more in giving parents tools in coping with COVID-19. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.